Hey, good morning, all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. Doug Padgett and Daniel Dietrich in with you today. It is Monday, a day when we talk about news, and it's also Monday, May 17th, which, as we know in this country, that's tax day. Sure, you've been told your whole life that tax day was April 15th. No. Now it's May 17th. Today's the day your taxes are due. So if that's news to you,
might want to get on that.
Yeah. Well, good for you. That you either have someone else worrying about such things or you just don't care. You know, that's that ignorance is bliss. That's a wonderful place to be. So we'd love to know where you're coming from. I'm coming from Minneapolis, Minnesota, sitting down today, and I've been sitting down more often on the podcast versus standing up. Not because I've wanted to take up the habit, but I've been biking a lot, Dan. I biked about 90, 100 miles this weekend to get ready for our cross-country bike tour that we're going to be doing with We the People for Common Good Immigration Border Practices rides that are going to happen around the country and across the country. So you host one where you are, that gets us around the country, and then some of us will be biking from San Diego, California, right on over there to St. Augustine, Florida, traveling about five and a half weeks of it along the southern border of the United States, the northern border of Mexico, and telling the stories and meeting the people. So I would love for you to come along this, wethepeople.org, go to votecommongood.com. You can also find a link over there. And I've been getting my legs ready. And so when I do these longer rides to then stand up, it just isn't feeling great to stand up. My legs filling up with some fluid when I stand too long. So Anyway, that's why I'm sitting down. Would love to know where you're coming from on this newsy day. Dan, how about you? Will you tell the fine people where
coming from you from South Bend, Indiana, and like everywhere, the mask mandate has lifted, and it feels like people are excited to be out and about, and it's kind of nice because I don't have to judge people as much as I did for not wearing a mask. Now I can assume the best of people, that they're twice vaccinated and they're on team science. I'm just going to believe that.
All of a sudden, you're not saying like, "Why aren't you wearing a mask?" You're saying, "Thanks for getting the vaccine."
Yeah.
It's the same person. That's awesome. That's the glass full, half full sort of attitude about it all. Yeah, I've also gone mask free most of the weekend. When I was on this bike ride, the one I did yesterday, I was biking with another person. He was out in front of me, and we came by an older couple walking toward us on the side of the road, and we were within 15 feet or so of away from the curb, and they were sort of walking along the curb of the road. And as we came up, she put her mask up over her mouth, like she's gonna stay mask free when no one's around. And we got close. She covered up because she's probably thinking like, here come these guys at 20 miles an hour, sweating and breathing and shooting their
blasting spit,
potential COVID all over the place. So, and obviously in the news that was a big deal and getting a lot of attention and people wanting to know, what we should do. And I'll just say this, a little commentary on that. For all the people that are squawking about, well, the CDC needs to tell us more about what we need to do and how we need to do it and how it's going to go. I mean, this is really complicated. The Centers for Disease Control was not set up to give explicit instruction about when you should take on or off your mask in every circumstance and situation. Mm-hmm. That's not what they're designed in the middle of a pandemic, right? That's not what they're designed to do. So we'd love for you to have a common good understanding of all things going on in our world and in the news. And boy, this feels like I heard someone say something really great today. He was talking about, the reporter had asked, you have to trust these people. And do we know if we can trust them? And he said, what this really comes down to for a lot of us in a lot of situations is a little common courtesy. I thought that's a great phrase. That's a phrase we could use around our shop around here. We want the common good and maybe a little common courtesy. And his point was, if I get in an elevator and I have my mask with me, I'll just put my mask on because I know that I'm safe, but I'm just going to help this person know that I'm safe, right? I mean, I've had the vaccine, my viral load, even if I have the virus, is so low that it's not transmissible, which is the big reason why you should get the vaccine, even if you don't worry about yourself, because it keeps you from spreading it to others. It's like a mask on the inside. That's the way I'm referring to it. It's like a mask inside your nasal passages and inside your back of your throat. Like mask that up with with your body's immune system. Don't just block it from coming out. Stop it at the source.
Yeah.
So this guy had a great phrase, a little common courtesy would also be nice. So how about that? How about just, maybe you don't need it for yourself, and maybe you don't want to make the big political statement that you're going to wear a mask, but just if it makes somebody else feel a little more comfortable, pop that thing on for a second.
It's not that hard to make
that
someone else feel safer.
That seems totally reasonable. Reasonable to me. I'll tell you what's not reasonable, Dan, is the violence, the state-sponsored violence that seems to be happening in all places in our world. I will be traveling tomorrow to Texas to raise my voice, along with a number of others, about something that doesn't make any sense to me, and that is that the governments of our country, our federal government and our state governments, put it in their hands to kill people who live in and are citizens of our country. And I think state-sponsored killing is a real problem. And there's one that's scheduled to happen on Wednesday. Quentin Jones is scheduled to be executed under the authority of the state of Texas. Texas is one of the few states that still allows for state-sponsored killing in the form of executions in this country. And they're one of the only states that's actually moving forward on these executions. We've had almost 4 years without state execution. The federal government, Donald Trump's government, and Donald Trump's order executed 11 people in a very short period of time from last July through January. But the state of Texas, like all the other states, had not been executing people for a whole variety of reasons, including COVID, which is just part of the shock of all of this, right? They thought it was too unsafe to execute someone. This is how perverse the execution system has become in the United States. Quentin Jones, I believe, should not be executed. And even if you're someone who thinks execution is reasonable at certain times, look into this case. I think you'll believe along with the rest of us. So tomorrow night, 5 p.m., we're going to be outside the governor's mansion in Austin, Texas, asking the governor for a reprieve of this execution sentence. And then on Wednesday, we'll be outside of the prison complex in Huntsville, Texas, where Quentin Jones is scheduled to be executed. And it's morally wrong. It doesn't work as law enforcement. It doesn't work for protection. There's just the value of executing people is it's just not there.
And the startling number of times they wrongfully convict people and later find out through DNA analysis, oh, this wasn't the guy.
Yeah, the number of people on death row who have been exonerated is so high that to believe that they caught all of those, like the system didn't work to the point of having someone on death row who was not guilty, but then the appeal system did work to be sure that all those people who were wrongly convicted then were later released and not executed. That doesn't pass the sniff test. That's not a reasonable assumption that's going on. And even so, I would say as a person of a moral calling, certainly a person of a religious calling, we shouldn't only be against executions because the innocent could be executed. We should be against executions because it's a wrong practice, because it's a use of violence and killing for purposes that are immoral and should not be followed through on. So someone like me is not, I don't even need for it to be. I would like other people to take this opinion too, if they'd like to. You don't need the person to be innocent. In fact, the morality of a society is not how do we treat the best of us. It's how do we treat those of us who behave the worst. But you're right. And in this case, there's some mental capacity issues that are at play. All the things that would come into play that would say to someone, let's stop execution. So we'll be talking about that more specifically on this podcast on Wednesday. Shane Claiborne and some others will be with us down there in Texas, and we're going to be talking with faith leaders. So we'll give a special focus onto that one. And on the theme of state-sponsored killing, that's how we should be referring to war actions as well. When our federal governments or our state militaries, our National Guard and all, are invoked by authority to go and kill other people, it's wrong as well. It's a state-sponsored killing. And we do all kinds of things to explain this away. And this is part of what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now. Israel is firing rockets into the Gaza area. Hamas, which is a group within Palestine, is firing rockets into Israel, and a conflict that is long brewing and needs to be solved, and not only a two-state solution, but also what Palestine and Hamas is saying, that the Israeli government needs to stop driving the Palestinians out of the housing that they have available to them in Israel. There's a lot of backstory to why this struggle is there. But the international community, the nation of Israel and the Palestinian organization, the belief that state-run killing, state-sponsored violence is appropriate, is what that in the international world we continue to say, well, there are times where that's reasonable. There are times where that's okay. Now, I'm going to come across as the pacifist that I am here in a minute and say we should consider any military action as a failure of imagination, as a failure of diplomacy, because we only use military actions and killing of people to get to the point where a negotiation can happen. Violence and killing is a failure of the system, but we talk about it as if it's one of the tools in the toolbox. We talk about it as if it's reasonable. And I would like to argue that the horrible killing of thousands of people in Palestine by Israel, it is morally wrong, it's ethically wrong, and it's practically wrong. It's not going to work.
Right.
We just have to consider that the war actions and the killing actions, and the same with Hamas, firing on buildings and killing people in Israel. This idea that that people of common good morality are not outcrying the state-run and the pseudo-state, like groups like Hamas, which is not the Palestinian government. It's a group within Palestine that organize. Now, the people who know these situations will say that the Palestine government uses Hamas as its extended arm, its sort of paramilitary arm. Biden is playing the classic line on this. Well, Israel has a right to defend itself. So they should be able to use military fighting. Let me use a bit of a metaphor from sports. And you know how I feel about sports if you're a regular listener to this. Not my favorite thing. But in some sports, if you punch someone, you not only are removed from that game, it's likely you'll be suspended from further games, and you might even be fined by the league. If in basketball you punch a guy or a woman, if you're in an NBA game, if you're in a football game and you smack somebody, you're going to be penalized, thrown out of the game, probably fine. Certainly in the beautiful sport of curling, you can't reach across and smack somebody. But in hockey, professional hockey, that's part of the game, right? In hockey, in boxing, in mixed martial arts, in those sports, you're supposed to punch somebody. Now, in boxing, mixed martial arts, that's the point. And in hockey, it's tolerated. In fact, they have whole players in hockey that's what they do. They're the enforcers. They're not even particularly good at handling the puck. When someone is checking their player too hard, you go out and the referees stand there while they fight until they get to a point where they think it's gone on long enough or it's sort of safe, and the crowd cheers. Here's my metaphor. We need to have international engagement, and we need to have our governments be more like curling, tennis, soccer, basketball, all the other sports that say, if you punch someone, that is outside the realm of what we call reasonable, and less like hockey, and certainly less like boxing, kickboxing, or mixed martial arts. What we've done is we've said, sure, you should be able to kill. I mean, you can kill people sometimes, and then we'll make a category. You should kill militants, or you should kill people that are in combat, but you shouldn't kill civilians. A hockey player should be able to punch another hockey player, but shouldn't jump up into the crowd and start swinging at a fan. This kind of thing. A reimagined understanding of our world and our government's engagement to say that when warring happens and firing missiles and rockets and guns and lasers and whatever else we're going to come up with, that we should be declaring that as wrong, as morally wrong. Now, we don't live in that world, so then we have to raise a different question about what's going on in Palestine, what's going on in Israel. But the backdrop of this is for people who believe that warring is a reasonable option that we should turn to, as opposed to a failed response to a failed system, and that we should be begrudging it at every moment. We should move it into the category where people put torture, right? Because you could say, like, well, if it's war, why would you have rules about war? How come you can't just do anything? Because moral human beings don't allow themselves to just do anything, right? So when children are killed, as what's happening in Israel and more explicitly in Palestine, you're like, that's horrible. But it's also horrible when a 27-year-old person with a military outfit on is killed. But these kids being killed, we look at it and we say, that is just not tolerable.
And that's where it's hard to see Biden say, well, Israel has a right to defend themselves. Because even under these rules, quote unquote, of war, this is wrong. They're targeting civilian buildings, and upwards of 200 people have been killed. A quarter of them are children. So if your defense of yourself leads to killing other people's kids, that's not defense. That's still a war crime. So it's just hard to stomach President Biden basically giving cover to the Israelis for this.
It is. And the idea, and when it gets framed in this way, well, someone has a right to defend themselves. That's an entire narrative, right? That covers a personal engagement. It covers how we think about our governments. It's stand your ground like law thinking. Mm-hmm. Well, you have a right to defend yourself. Well, I would say you have a right to defend yourself up until the point that you don't need to defend yourself any longer. Right? That's as far. I mean, as someone who holds to a pacifist ethic, your resistance of the evil coming toward you is different than tit for tat, than response, than escalating response, than shock and awe, than overwhelming power. All of which is the conversation coming out of Israel and supported by many people in our government. So, look, I'm all for Joe Biden, but I think on this one he needs to listen to the. I mean, here's the hard thing: you don't get to be a president in this country and be a pacifist, right? They won't let you. You wouldn't win an election, and you really probably couldn't even fulfill your duty because we have a broken morality when it comes to how we're choosing to use war in this country. There are some countries where they have a pacifist or non-engagement stance. You could be the president of one of those countries. But this one, we now need people to lean deeper into an ethic of nonviolence and less into an ethic of, well, defend yourself, tit for tat, this kind of way of thinking about the world. It's just not going to treat anybody well. And it's most obvious when in a small space like Gaza, that many Palestinians see as their homeland, a small area like Jerusalem, and they're hurling tons of ammunition on one another. And there's an entire industry that goes into this, how we make our weapons, where weapons come from, how our training happens. It's just extraordinary. Every war there has ever been, when the war is over, people will say, well, that was a tragedy. And then yet we leave it in there as an option. And what I'm just saying in this call is that we should get to something much less aggressive. It's part of the human understanding. It's part of human morality and human consciousness. I think it's part of what separates us from being animals. Human beings are these curious creatures where we have a morality that allows us to self-harm and to resist harming others. Where in the animal world, animals kill and eat other animals. They rarely do it to make a point, and they rarely do it to win an argument. They rarely do it for some sort of high-minded reason. They do it to take over territory. Animals will drive out other animals to own the land. But as human beings, we should rise above those animalistic responses. It's part of what our human status calls us to.
Yeah.
Be more humane. All right. Speaking of
Yeah.
that, apparently eagles have the conservation of eagles has worked. There are more bald eagles now than there has been like since 1955. I mean, the eagles are doing great, but apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, who is not afraid to scare Republicans on a daily basis about pretty much anything, their headline is "Bald eagles are back and they want to eat your pets." I mean, just one of the great headlines that you could imagine. The sub-headline is America's majestic emblem conjures feelings of awe. They also attack small dogs and scavenge landfill.
And I've got to say, Doug, that was a seamless transition from Israel-Palestine
Didn't know how I was going
Eagles.
to get there, did you? I live in an area that's, where here in Minneapolis where there are bald eagles around, and very regularly you'll be walking or driving, riding your bicycle, and you'll see people stopped and looking up at the sky, and you're like, oh, but there's and there's an eagle, and they do inspire awe. I mean, they are really, I think it's partly because just how cool they look, at least to my mind, that's that little head and it's white and those big wings. They're just great looking. The idea that they attack your small dogs, it had not dawned on me. I mean, those sweet little, dogs that have been bred for fashion and for carrying in a little, that they're now, that they had the run of the land during the time when the bald eagle was a bit more endangered.
Eagle fodder.
Well, and I guess that's probably why, the military uses the bald eagle, and it's our national bird, right? It's got that sort of predator idea to it. Did you know, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard this, that Ben Franklin wanted the state or the country's animal to be the
turkey, right? Yeah.
I've heard that. Which, I've made a lot of fun in my head about, but I saw two turkeys the other day here, and they were huge, and they were in some sort of mating dance with one another. They are also a majestic animal. I mean, a full-sized big old turkey, it's not as uncool as you might think. It could give an eagle a run for its money.
Well, it would have to run because they can't really fly that well.
Well, Barbara is saying that Barbara Taylor is saying, I hope that these eagles don't attack cats. We keep our cats inside now mostly. Oh, I'm quite sure they attack cats. I mean, I think, but I don't have all the details from the article, but the headline is just spectacular. I saw a couple. We have these ducks that spend time in our kitty corner neighbor's yard and then walk across our street. It's like a mallard duck. Walk across the street and get food from the other neighbor on the other side of the street. And Shelley and I saw this happening yesterday, and I thought, ducks are not really designed to walk. I mean, they got those little flappy feet. They got that big long body on those little ankles, and their little feet are designed to paddle in the water. They're like walking on, with fins, swimming fins on. And I said to Shelley, they can fly. Why don't they just fly over the street to the other place? It takes them like 6 minutes to walk out of the yard, walk across this little road. Traffic is backing up while they waddle their way over there. Like, I want to yell at them. You know how to fly.
You have wings.
I'm only walking because I can't fly. If I could fly, I would fly across the street. I'd be flying everywhere. Like, look at those big, beautiful wings you got. Just pop up in the air and soar over, and you're back at your little pond. And maybe they're like, look, we're older. We don't have a lot to do during our days. It's just how we spend our time.
It's a delightful stroll.
It's a delightful.
They're enjoying it.
We're enjoying our time. Oh, the little animal world. See, it's sweet. May we be as sweet too. Hey, you know what else is sweet? There's another great transition for you in a potpourri of news, common good news. Tax credits are coming to people that have children. So congratulations, Dan. We're paying people to breed in America. Thank you, Joe Biden.
I'm grateful.
What about the babies? Well, how about giving the babies some money? How about that? So for all the people that say Joe Biden isn't pro-life enough, how about a little dollars to help pay for your kids? What they have done is they have increased the child tax credit, meaning that the federal government not only doesn't charge, it doesn't um, gives you a break on your taxes. They give you back money. It's one of the way. There are many ways that our government injects money into the economy. This is one of the things that people worry about when it comes to economics. One of the things I've learned from Fidel, our Fadl, our economist. Fadl tells us that, look, what the federal government does is it controls the spigot of how much money is in the government. And inflation is caused when they put too much money into the government or into the economy. The government puts too much money into the economy, and then there's too much rolling around, and that allows prices to go up. So that's what inflation is all about. And this was sort of his clarity on this was new to me. Well, one of the ways of the many ways the government puts money into the economy is sometimes they buy big contracts, for roads or highways or military or this sort of thing. And other times they send people money. You could think of Social Security. You could think of federal support for people that have lost their jobs, this kind of thing. And for kids, they just give families money. So they're giving a bunch of them, and the increase is going to be starting in mid-July. And so many, many, many families are going to see automatic deposits coming from the federal government right into their bank account. I think it's a great thing. I think it's finally moving us away from the kind of austerity approach of the government to poor people that was came into favor during the time of the Reagan Revolution in the early 1980s. I'm glad that we can now put an end to that tragic period of social non-spending in this government. And this is a good thing. So we are going to, people are going to be supported around this. And I hope people give a lot of credit where credit is due, not only to the president who deserves it, not only to Congress who passed it, but also just to the notion that we as a people have looked around and said, hey, after 30 or 40 years of doing it this other way, we've realized that that's not working so well.
Yeah.
Like cutting people's taxes when they don't make enough money to pay taxes doesn't help them. Tax cuts,
Right.
like I'm just going to take less from you, is not a positive way for the government to participate with you. We're going to invest, give you money, pay for things that you benefit from. Well, that does now. And there's sometimes you don't want the government doing that, right? I don't need the government paying for all the things in my life, but they should pay for some things. And then we should have that debate. What should they pay for? And what shouldn't they pay for? People like me are on the side where you think, let's pay for more. Okay, here's another comment. Michelle Braze saying, is that Alan Alda? I will tell you, I appreciate that so much. About once a week, someone thinks that I'm.
Yeah,
so
we'll get a couple of those a week in the comments.
Yeah. You know what I think that means? We should invite Alan Alda on. Let's do it. Let's reach out.
I like that idea.
And we'll make a little video. We'll send it to him. We'll tweet it to him. We'll find some way to get to him, and we'll do an Alan Alda interviewing an Alan Alda lookalike with Alan Alda. But thank you, Michelle. Appreciate you you noticing that, and thank you to the Biden administration and all for vaccines and for money in bank accounts. Yeah. All the stuff that makes my Republican friends lose their minds.
Well, and the funny thing is, when you give people money, they spend it in the economy. They buy clothes, they buy food, they buy dishwashers, they buy things that stimulate the economy. So I don't understand the outrage.
I don't look, if the outrage was, as Fadl tells us, if the outrage is when the government injects too much money by any level of spending, whether it's direct payments to people or it's reimbursements or it's contracts, if they put too much money in, it spurs the economy on too much, and then things get too expensive, and we call that inflation. If that's
too
the
much
argument
demand
we're gonna have,
for a limited amount of dishwashers or whatever. Yeah.
Right. If you give everybody $3,000 more, that's going to cause people to say, like, I'm going to remodel my kitchen and I'm going to buy a new dishwasher. And all of a sudden dishwashers salespeople are like, hey, people used to have to save up a long time. Now they got $3,000 for a dishwasher. We can charge more for dishwashers. That's inflation.
Mm-hmm.
More people are now looking for a dishwasher than previously were looking for a dishwasher. And there's still only so many dishwashers, so they get more expensive. That's how it works. That's not how most people think about inflation. They even if they're afraid of inflation, they're not totally sure where it comes from. They just assume, I don't know, somehow the government did something and now things got more expensive. The folks who know how the economy works understand the influence between government spending and government and inflation. And so when the Fed, a little bit on a Friday here, but when the Federal Reserve says we're going to raise interest rates, the amount of money that it costs for banks to borrow money from each other, and then that's going to cause loans that you get from your bank to have a higher interest rate, what they're trying to do is then take money out of the economy. Right. So you think about it like there's a container, like this coffee cup that I have sitting here. And if you fill it all the way to the top and it sits there level, it's sort of perfectly full. This is what economists want, is a full economy. They don't want it to be less than full, like people aren't working and having a hard time. They want to fill it up, but they don't want it to overflow. If it starts to overflow, they call that inflation. And then what you do is you then siphon some out so that you have a little bit of margin in there for a little bit of jiggle, right? So you just get below the level, right? Because the economy is not consistent. So you just get a little low. And if it's a little too high, you siphon some out. Interest rates, siphoning the money out, pulling it out of the economy and putting it back into the government. Because again, the federal government, unlike the state government, the city government, the county government, federal government doesn't have a bank account that it puts it into. It just makes it disappear. That's how the federal government, because the federal government runs the economic system. So the money just goes away. It comes out of the economy and is gone. And then later, if they want to put it back in, they just put new money in. And that's what the Federal Reserve, that's what federal economic policy is all about. Can we keep this thing sort of moving? Triple side note, this is why cryptocurrency is never going to replace the dollar and shouldn't. Money, the economic system, should absolutely be tied to our governments, not tied to just simply the free markets, because there would be no one siphoning out or putting back in if that was the case. A world of cryptocurrencies or any other currencies that are tied to nothing other than what people want would be madness. So
Yeah.
Cryptocurrencies might be good for a whole lot of other things, but not as a replacement for the dollar.
I don't know if you noticed this week, Elon Musk of Tesla said they were not going to use Bitcoin anymore because of its environmental impact, which that's a whole separate discussion. I didn't realize that digital currency had an environmental impact, but apparently it does. But so Tesla said they're not going to use Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin just plummeted because just a few words from a person like Elon Musk can just send Bitcoin into the dumpster. And it'll bounce back. It bounces all over, but it's just pretty fascinating to watch how volatile it is.
Yes, and just incredibly dangerous, right?
Yeah.
That you would put too much money. We should do that with Fadl. Let's have a whole conversation with our Common Good podcast economist about cryptos and the cryptocurrencies. All right, a couple other things happen in the news. Let's just remind ourselves how radically dangerous the Republicans can be. This is we think a lot about politics around here because politics has to do with how we organize our lives. All right, and in a set of things to be concerned about with Republicans, and especially Donald J. Trump, the failed president of the United States, he's not going away. He is just repositioning himself into another place. And one of the headlines that comes out a lot, here's one that's on the screen for those of you that are watching. Those of you that are listening, I'll just read it to you. Most Republicans still won't accept that Biden won. That's from 538. Biden is polling poorly on immigration, while the Virginia GOP has an unpredictable race for governor. The big headline is they won't accept that Biden won. So this is a big conversation point. I've tried to listen as carefully as I can to what I hear Republicans saying. And I do know that 67% believe that Joe Biden did not win fairly. Sometimes that is taken to mean 67 or 70% of Republicans think that the election was fraudulent or that it was by fraud that Trump lost and that Biden won. Here's where it's more complicated. so many Republicans, and I heard this over the weekend, and when a lot of people were being pressed on what they believe about Liz Cheney saying the things that she was saying about Donald Trump. What Republicans believe who say we think that Joe Biden didn't win fairly is more than, oh, a bunch of fakey people went in and fraudulently voted under someone else's name. That's not the only thing they mean. Some people do mean that, but most of those 67%, here's what I think they mean. Because of COVID, because states changed the voting rules between March and November, and many did that not following the normal procedures by which rules of voting should be changed, and they use some level of executive order, and they talk about Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Arizona, the places where Trump lost. They're saying, and these are what some of their lawsuits were about, they're saying they made these changes, they changed the rules of voting, and then those rule changes got a whole lot more people voting for Biden than would have voted for Biden had they not changed the rules, and that's what we mean. It's kind of like when Stacey Abrams said about her gubernatorial run in 2016 or 18. There was systemic pressure put on some voters to not vote, and that's what caused my loss. So systemic repression held down the vote. A lot of Democrats talk about this. We're doing a bunch of work on this in Vote Common Good. It's called voter suppression laws, the new laws being passed. What some Republicans, many Republicans, in fact, I would say, are saying is there was voter uplift, not suppression, but voter uplift that caused a whole lot of people to be able to vote who normally wouldn't. And now we have an unfair situation that no one could have expected before last March. And so we ended up calculating with a whole new batch of people, and that's why it was unfair. So this was not a free and fair election. That's the argument they're making. They're not just saying you can find all the fraudulent vote, because everyone always says, well, show me where these voters are, right? There aren't any. Their point is much more subtle than that. It's like there was a lift of too many voters coming in. Now, I will say, I don't think that's true. I think the number of people that voted was the right number. I think the numbers were going to be through the roof. And the reason Trump is pushing this is because he was told by his analysts that if he reached 67 or 69 million votes, that would be enough for him to win. It turned out that he got 74 million and Biden got 82 million or whatever it was, 81 million. So yes, voting turnout was through the roof. Was that because voting access was opened up in an unfair way? No, I don't think it was an unfair way. But this is the complaint that Republicans are making, is the state legislature didn't say you could change the rules and all these rule changes, and then all these other people voted, and we can't even know like where they came from. And well, your expectation build about at least Trump's, and then he puts this in the heads of so many other people, his expectations weren't fulfilled. But I think here's why I think it's important, because the argument Republicans are making was we made it too easy for people to vote, and that's not right. Right. And the argument that Democrats are making is we're making it too hard for people to vote. It's a little bit of, Goldilocks here. Like this bed's too soft, this bed's too hard. We're all trying to find the bed that's just right. The reason this is important is we don't want to say 70% of Republicans think Joe Biden is a illegitimate president. 30% say Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. Of that other percentage, they're included in the 70%. The other 40% is like, look, I just think this whole thing was a mess, this election. So when you ask me in a poll, do I think this was fair? No, I don't think it was fair. I think a lot of these state legislatures, I think they did things that made it more possible for more people to vote. That's not totally different than what Democrats like me say when I say, do I think that voting in Georgia and North Carolina and Mississippi and these other places and Texas where they're passing, do I think it's fair? No, I think they're repressing votes. That's not quite the same. Now, do I think they repressed votes in 2016? Absolutely. Do I think Donald Trump was an illegitimate president? No. I think he was a legitimate president who was totally and completely unqualified and harmful to the country, and did everything I could to remove him. But most people don't know that nuance. They just think somebody, like, he won and the system wasn't fair and this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. So what I'm not trying to make people like have more empathy or sympathy for Republicans, because they don't necessarily deserve your empathy or your sympathy. I think it's good to hear them clearly and not grant to them some level of despising or mistrust of Joe Biden's administration that they're not asking for. Let's acknowledge them, call them over, and say, okay, let's make sure that the bed's not too soft and the bed's not too hard, and let's try to get this right. And the whole country feels like it's being batted around by two sides that are both saying this election is unfair. Now, personally, I would argue voter suppression is a real problem. Voter over freedom is not a real problem.
What, you can vote early? How dare you? That's gonna.
How dare you?
Yeah.
All these drop boxes, you can somebody else can send you an application for a mail-in early ballot. They shouldn't be able to send you that application. You should have to go get that application yourself. If they send it to you, then this isn't fair.
Right. If you love America this much, you'll stand in line for 4 hours to vote. Yeah.
Right. Let's have that argument, right? Do we think there's too much uplift? Do we think there's too much suppression? What's going on? But let's not grant the 30% of Republicans' opinion that Trump is the only legitimate president elected in the last election. Let's not give that over to these other people when pollsters ask them and headlines misconstrue the answer being, do you believe it was a free and fair election? Because when you ask Republicans, do you believe it was free and fair? They're like, no, they changed the rules in the middle of it. So it wasn't fair. That's what many of them are saying. Now, we should disabuse them of that idea. Yes, it is fair. It was fair. We should have that conversation, but not go so far as to say, I don't even know who these people are. How can they say that this was a fraudulent election? Where are the people? There's only one dead person found to be voting in all of Nevada. Like, that's not what the argument is solely. And it's not where the majority of people who feel it wasn't fair even are. So we're just much better off in the persuasion world to actually be dealing with the argument that people are making rather than the argument we think they're making or would like them to make in order to push back on it. And so there were people on the news shows yesterday. This Representative Crenshaw was trying to make this argument. Like, look, I think there was a lot of problem going on in the election. We need to look at it and we need to find out why. And basically what they're saying is, how in the world did we end up with so many people voting? I'm like, well, you had the worst president in the history of the American experiment, and people wanted him gone, and other people wanted him in.
Very galvanizing, that.
Yes. And because of COVID, there were a lot of people who were paying more attention and were around, and voting became easy. Like, look, I'm somebody that just thinks, voting should be the easiest thing in the world for you to do. We should never make this hard. We should be,
it should be a national holiday. You should be able to vote on the weekends. You should be able to vote late at night when you get off your day shift.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Barbara brings up a good point that there's these turnout models that all the political parties use, and they know how many people from every, grouping they believe should be voting. And when those numbers get higher, especially when more brown and black people and non-conforming white normative types of voters vote, that makes people increasingly nervous. But what they're really nervous about is just more voting. In fact, this is something that Trump literally said himself, and in some of their lawsuits they said, if we increase access to voting, Republicans won't win. They know it.
Yeah.
So they've been trying to create systems by which voting is more there's more struggle in it. And they know that that's going to benefit, that they're going to see higher motivated voters.
Like, what other, I haven't heard an exclamation or an explanation that makes any sense for reducing the number of voting, like, polling stations. Like, what is the rationale of that? to make it way harder for people to vote, make lines longer.
Yes.
How does that benefit anything? How does that prevent fraud? Don't see any logic there.
Yeah, all the reforms that have gone on, and every state every year considers how can they change their voting processes to make it better. They're all doing that. Tricia makes a good point that in Pennsylvania, they changed their laws back in 2019, did it by the book, and then Republicans decided to sue in 2020 because they didn't like those changes that happened. Well, that is what goes on, and that is what happens. And all of this is in this realm normal. What's not normal is that normally the president of the United States who runs for re-election, and normally they win, but sometimes a loser like Donald Trump comes along and just plays to type, and he doesn't win. But when the loser loses, they don't play along with the rules weren't fair. Donald Trump was saying the rules weren't fair before people voted. In fact, Donald Trump said about Ted Cruz winning Iowa in the caucus that went on in Iowa in 2016. The only reason he says that Ted Cruz won and Donald Trump lost was, wait for it, it was a fraudulent election. He has been using the if I don't win, it's a fraudulent election argument nonstop. It has nothing to do with the facts on the ground. None of this. That's what makes this different. Not that governments are trying to figure out how they're going to take their votes from their citizens, not that the process is being adjusted. All that normal. We should keep doing it always. This should all be in the delight of day. We should be talking publicly and extensively about what does it mean for someone to vote? How do they vote? How can voting happen more regularly? Should it happen more frequently? Should we have more polling places, less polling places? All that normal. And then when the loser is declared the loser, they say, I lost. And when the winner says, is told that they won, they say, I won. And it was a free and fair election. Both of them agree, and we move on.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has been saying, no. He's been saying that elections are fraudulent for decades. Is it like Barack Obama didn't win? It was a fraudulent. Like, this is just.
It's such a like fifth grade schoolyard playground. Like, if I don't win, the other team cheated. Like, it's embarrassingly childish to continue to use that argument. You know?
Just bonkers. I mean, just bonkers. And the fact that the Republican Party has given into this, and they won't come out. I mean, guys like Kevin McCarthy, who's the highest ranking person for the Republicans in the House of Representatives, comes out and says, no one's saying this was an illegitimate election. And people are like, everyone is saying that. He's like, no, not everyone. One guy is for sure.
The main guy.
Former failed president Donald Trump. He's saying it, and that's what matters, because you're also saying at the same time, he is the leader of our party. It almost wouldn't matter what everybody else is saying. If everybody else was saying this was a fraudulent election and Donald Trump won, Donald Trump said, look, I've done a lot of things. I didn't win. I've committed a lot of crimes. Ask Michael Cohen. I've screwed up the presidency. Guilty as charged. Didn't win. Like, of all of his great accomplishments, winning is not one of them. It wouldn't matter who else says it, right? The only reason this matters is because the Republicans continue to declare him to be their leader, and he's saying it.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a Democrat or a nonpartisan person and you're listening to this, imagine that the person with the most respect and power in your political worldview started to tell you that something is true. And ask yourself how deeply you would not believe that. Right? If Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, or you pick your presidential aspiring leader, came out and started saying things on a regular basis, full-throatedly, would it be as easy as you think it is for these Republicans to step away from that belief and say, no, that's probably not true? You might over time start to think, I don't know, why would they be saying that if it wasn't true? I mean, that doesn't make sense that they would say it if it wasn't true. Because with those leaders, you don't believe that they regularly say things that aren't true. Donald Trump has just been doing that his entire life. It is so well documented
Yeah.
to the point that people are like, I don't even worry about what he says. Like, oh my gosh. I mean, I get an email a day that, you know, uh, uh, tells me to reconsider everything I'm saying publicly. So, if you want to send a nice email, you
That's
can
the
send that
nicest way to
to
describe what those.
podcast@lowcommongood.com or go over to dougpadgett.com and fill out the form, which some people certainly find. And I will regularly get into a little back and forth with some of these folks and say, hey, what do you think? Every time they'll say something like this. Well, I know that Donald Trump says that stuff. I'm not talking about what he says. I'm talking about what he does. I'm like, one of the things leaders do, a doing of leaders, is saying things. That is a doing, And what he's doing is saying this election was not fair. And the difference is that it's him saying it.
Yeah.
Because of his position as well. So all these Republicans fall into this stuff. So anyway,
Well,
I
a
just
little
think
chink in the armor here. Franklin Graham, longtime supporter, is giving Trump a little reality check, calling into question Trump's age, health, and diet all at the same time. So it's not a.
it's like Franklin Graham now is like, you're fat, you're old, and you doing nothing about it. You probably shouldn't run for president. How about this guy, Franklin Graham? You're too old, you're not healthy, and your diet is a real catastrophe. That's what you picked. Like, you were going to pick something about Donald Trump's life and behavior, and you went for his weight, and you went for his age. You
Still
didn't go
won't even consider character, history of policy. It's just.
I mean, honestly. Okay. Good for you, Franklin, for finding some way to create some daylight between you and the great leader. But really, you became an ageist and a healthist and a sizist. That's where you went.
You went body shaming instead of talking about character.
Oh my gosh! I mean, look, if Franklin Graham had made it as a fitness consultant, if he was in the wellness industry, these comments make sense. That's not why people turn to Franklin Graham. What's his take on the diet of the current president? I mean, just oh, God bless you, Franklin Graham, because I don't know that anybody else will. Hey, also in the world of Nuttyville, Marco Rubio took time on CBS 60 Minutes, which is all just a pitch for him to try to, raise his stature so he can run for president in 2024. He raises unidentified flying object concerns. He's concerned that the government is not looking enough into UFOs. Wants to take the reports more seriously. Now, do you know who
Doug,
that sounds
I'm worried
an awful lot
about
like?
who these UFOs are voting for, because we should probably look into that.
Oh, that's great. We should come up with some way for a UFO to be an unidentified something. That's what these voters are. You need a cute little acronym for them. But do you know who this honestly sounds a lot like? Hillary Rodham Clinton and John Podesta. Did you know that Hillary was big into like all this UFO stuff?
I did not.
Area 51 and all. Yeah, she was. And she was even saying, and so was John Podesta, who they thought was going to become one of her, chief advisors, maybe head of staff, that if she had won in 2016, they were going to take much more seriously what the government make public what the government knows about all of this. Oh yeah, they're in deep. I think this one crosses political boundaries. I think there are super make America great again people that don't believe UFOs at all. I think there's people that want a common good America that don't believe in UFOs at all. And I think the opposite of that is true. There's people who buy it on every side, and that is just a great coming together.
The great unifier.
Sure that there's some conspiracy theory going on. I mean, just really,
I love it.
really something. UFOs. Thank God that there's still those things around that people can keep their eye on. All right, and finally, Axios did a big special show last night and outed the fact that Donald Trump, in his final days between November 9th and leaving office, tried to not only remove the military of the United States from Afghanistan, but also from all of Africa, from Germany, and from many of the other NATO countries. He had some person who's an advisor to him write up an entire memo, got all the way through the Pentagon, him saying, I want all of our forces in Europe to come home by January 20th. He was trying to gut the U.S. support for NATO. And look, you know where I am on the military. Like, I think we should stop killing people. What Donald Trump was trying to do was so classically Trump reckless.
Destabilize, sow chaos. Yeah.
Just throw everything into the wind. And was doing it without running it through any of the official channels. The stories that are now starting to come out about the 4 years of the Trump administration, just how unbelievably incompetent it was and how dangerously behaving it was. But in the last 2 months after the election, when he was obsessing and had the power of the presidency in his hand, they were trying to pull off all kinds of things that were just outrageous to the people in the entire system. So now these stories are starting to come out, and we're just going to see how unbelievably reckless this man was when he was the president of the United States. And it's not clear to me that that's going to cause anybody who voted for him in 2020 to not want to vote for him again if he runs in 2024. I mean, finding out, this week that even these anti-Trump Republicans, Adam Kinzinger, who's a representative from Illinois, Liz Cheney, who's led all this stuff, they both voted for Trump in 2020, and they say it publicly. Like, Liz Cheney's at least willing to say, well, I regret that vote. But really, Liz Cheney, really, Adam Kinzinger, you watched this guy for 4 years as someone in a co-equal branch of government, and you said to yourself, I want him again? Well, I couldn't vote for Joe Biden. Well, I don't know. Write yourself in. Vote for each other. Right. Don't vote at all. You didn't do that. You voted. You said, I want him to be the president again.
Like, didn't George W. Bush come out and say he didn't vote for Trump? Like, even
did
George
he?
W. Yeah.
Oh, or lie about it. I don't know. Like, when like, no one knows when I just playing both sides all the time. Like, well, January 6th really changed it for me. Really? The other 4 years?
Other 4 years. Yeah.
Now, as somebody who works with us and all this says to me, like, no, you need to, people are, they're coming around in their own time frame, quoting myself back, your own time frame. People, their alarm clocks are going off at different times all over the sleeping country. Yeah. But when you're a congressperson and now you're out trying to bring an end to this guy, and you're like, well, yeah,
I did vote for him, but
I did think it would be better that he would be president than Joe Biden. Really? Like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I can't see my way clear of that. But all right, other things happening in the in the news. Of course, we know that they matter. Whatever's happening in your world, we'd love to know about it. Tell us. Thanks for all the action in the chat today. Keep up with it. Tomorrow, Rob Ryerson will be hosting and that I'll come to you from Texas, and we'll talk about executions and so on. So thanks for being with us on this, Dan. Good chatting with you today, and to all of y'all. Somebody will talk to you from here tomorrow.